This is Mark Gunn Media.
Hit it!
Welcome to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. I'm your host, Mark Gunn. The views expressed on this program are those of the host and guests and not necessarily reflective of anyone or any entity associated with this broadcast. This episode, Baraargua, The Awakening. Over the next several weeks, we're going to be doing something a little different on Gunshots Straight from the Hip, and it stems from an ancestry DNA test that I took several weeks ago. The results came back recently, and I found out that I am a rather interesting mix coming straight out of the motherland. So according to my DNA results, my ethnicity estimate has me at 26% Nigeria, 22% being from Cameroon and the Western Bantu peoples, another 20% of Benin and Togo, and 11% of Mali. The rest, single percentages of British, Irish, Scottish, Wales, and indigenous America from the Yucatan Peninsula. There's also a little bit of Ivory Coast and Ghana and a slice of German in there too. In getting this information, I'm starting to learn a little bit more about who my ancestors are, and I'm starting to link with family members that are distant cousins. So that's a fun process, and I'll be talking more about that as I continue to learn more about my own origins. How does that relate to what we're doing over the next several weeks? Well, back a few years ago, just after Donald Trump got elected to the White House, I wrote an afro-futuristic sci-fi story called The Awakening. And what we're going to do over the next several weeks is we'll give you several chapters of the story. It was a story I wrote just for the heck of it, never really got it published, but I thought you might get a kick out of it. So here we go with Baraargua, The Awakening. Forward. The following is a work of pure fiction. Some of the names used are of real people, and some of the events presented for historical context actually happened. Set in the not-too-distant future, this story illustrates the consequences of an apathetic and easily manipulated population. In an effort to make America great again, such apathy leads to a world where the United States as we know it no longer exists. And the problems of the past, having never been resolved, continue to plague a nation living in denial. The old expression, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it, has come to pass, and change has come to America, but not for the better. Luckily, another old expression, and the children shall lead them, comes to fruition, giving America hope and an opportunity to save itself from the politics of self-destruction. Chapter 1. How We Got Here. The year is 2038. 10 years ago, American democracy was completely done away with by what we've come to know as the administration. By some bizarre confluence of events and a voting populace that pretty much fell for every racist, sexist, and xenophobic rant uttered by candidate Donald Trump, he was elected as the 45th president of the United States. 2016, for all intents and purposes, would be the last year democracy would be the American way. The 2018 midterms may as well have never happened because it ended very badly for just about everyone. Voter apathy, despite some signs of life from the Democrats, all but ensured another win for the Republicans. Due to the Republican Party's systematic dismantling of the Constitution, Americans lost, no, more like gave up most of their rights. To this day, they still think that Trump made America great again. 2020 would be the last year an election was ever held. You pretty much know about the first 4 years. Yeah, I know. Who knew he'd last that long? Scandals, pissing off allies, a revolving door of trolls, that disastrous tax reform of 2017, and of course, the endless wars against countries that were once allies and alliances with those that were once enemies. Remember the whole Russia investigation? Turns out that there actually was collusion between members of the campaign and the Kremlin. Several upper-level administration officials were indicted and ended up working with the investigation. However, once Americans started turning up either dead or missing, nothing was ever heard about it ever again. The lead investigator for the FBI, Robert Mueller, vanished without a trace. He was found a couple of years later buried underneath the giant FBI logo on the floor of the Bureau's lobby, when the agency was disbanded and the building demolished. As some sort of sick, twisted joke, his mouth was stuffed with a bunch of Russian rubles. These days, seems we see a lot more of Vladimir Putin roaming around the Mar-a-Lago. The White House was destroyed in a land-grabbing scheme by the administration back in 2022. A Trump hotel now stands there. We all knew that Trump wasn't bright enough to pull off all of the scams done in the name of the American people. The real power was in the hands of the administration. Stephen Miller, longtime Trump aide, became the chief of staff. He got the gig by having the former chief, Reince Priebus, murdered. Of course, it's never been proven. Now, it was never even allowed to be investigated. I can still recall his interview when he said that, quote, "The powers of the president were absolute and would not be questioned." We dismissed him as merely an obnoxious little troll. Big mistake. Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, the attorney general who single-handedly set back police reform and civil rights over 100 years, was convicted of lying to Congress and pardoned within seconds of the conviction. One of his proudest moments came as he successfully repealed the 5th and 13th Amendments of the Constitution. He spent the last few years going after and jailing the descendants of Martin Luther King Jr. Seems he was still miffed about that letter that Coretta Scott King wrote about him back in the 80s. You see, he was deemed to be too racist to ever be appointed as a federal judge. Mrs. King's letter played a big role in his not getting the job. Thanks to Sessions, politicians can literally get away with murder, and Jim Crow 2.0 is now the law of the land. Simply being black in America is hazardous to your health, especially since white supremacist groups like the KKK, Aryan Nation, and various skinhead groups were made agents of the state. Finally, there's Ivanka Trump, the one person able to keep her dad in line when he occasionally goes off the deep end. One of the first things she did was to have Melania and Barron shipped off to God knows where. Seems that Mrs. Trump forgot that she was merely eye candy and started demanding to be treated like the First Lady. And her son, although by all accounts a good kid, according to Ivanka, he was too much of a liability after the 5th and 6th kidnapping attempt by members of the resistance or Trump's own staff. That's never been figured out. You see, the president was diagnosed as being mentally unstable back in 2019, and Big Pharma developed medication to counteract the effects. By the way, the actual cure was developed back in 2003, but you know how corporate greed works. Control the disease instead of cure it in order to affect the profit margin. Democrats tried and failed on numerous occasions to have him removed from office by invoking the 25th Amendment, but could never get the votes needed. The consequences for their families ended up being too steep, so they never tried it again. The speeches the president gives are nothing short of a Big Brother-esque display that would have made Kim Jong-un blush, were he still alive. Seems he had the nerve to beat Trump in a round of golf, and they killed him because of it. When Trump speaks, you're really hearing the words of the administration. You would think that after all these years, the president would have learned to read beyond a 5th grade level. Some things never change. During the administration's reign, the Constitution has pretty much been dismantled for black people. We exist in a dystopian landscape that would make George Orwell's 1984 fantasy seem like paradise. You know the expression, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer? Under Trump, blacks didn't get richer. They saw their fortunes confiscated under new corporate tax rules. The poor paid their taxes through slave labor. Slavery made a huge comeback at the end of 2026. Remember the midterms? Republicans were crushed as they lost the majorities in the House and Senate. However, because of the administration, those election results were nullified, and the politicians that won were forced into labor camps. Miller also made it a point to track down the voting records of every American that voted against the GOP and put them into camps as well. He was able to do so because of Executive Order 66868.3, which took away the right to privacy at the voting booth. Because of Jim Crow 2.0, every bit of progress blacks had made was slowly erased. Every civil right our ancestors fought and died for, gone. Every reform designed to address years of mistreatment, done away with as if it never existed. We essentially had no rights in America. I saw friends and relatives taken off the street randomly and either beaten or killed on the spot under the breathing while black provision of the Papers, Please law. This was legislation that came out of Arizona back in the late 2000s. It failed because it was decided back then that you shouldn't have the ability to question someone's citizenship during a stop by the police. It was deemed unconstitutional. Not anymore in 2038. After years of very careful planning and pooling of what resources we had left, the Garvey Initiative was born. Inspired by Marcus Garvey's Back to Africa movement of the mid-20th century, some of us chose to leave America and go home. This is where my story begins, and that story will continue right after this. If you're an advertiser, one of the most important things about getting your message out is actually standing out from the rest of the crowd. If you're listening to this program right now, this is where you'd hear your commercial. As an exclusive sponsor of Gunshots Straight from the Hip, your commercial is professionally produced and gets a longer shelf life based on your needs. Gunshots Straight from the Hip is a unique and compelling program unlike anything else in the marketplace. Episodes are available for download on iTunes, TuneIn, and MarkGunMedia.com. And depending on how you tailor your message, the potential for new and repeat customers is that much greater. Best of all, it's extremely cost-effective. If you'd like more information on how you can be a sponsor of this broadcast, call Mark Gun Media, Inc. at 502-407-0283. That's 502-407-0283. Or log on to markgunmedia.com.
This is Mark Gun Media.
Hit it!
One of the biggest accomplishments we've had over the past year is the continued growth of our podcast, Gunshots Straight from the Hip. If you haven't heard it, you can check it out now on our website at markgunmedia.com or on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or the TuneIn Radio app. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Past episodes are available for download right now. Each episode is written and produced from a perspective not heard enough in this medium, the black perspective. However, Gunshots Straight from the Hip is not limited to a black audience. Anyone can get something out of it. We tackle social and political issues, sometimes some slice of life stuff, in a way that's very compelling and unlike any other podcast on the market right now. With my experience as an award-winning audio producer and a reputation for being rather outspoken, Gunshots Straight from the Hip is something you won't want to miss. Over the next year, we want to add more subscribers, with a goal of 1,000 new subscribers every month. If you haven't joined us yet, go to our website at markgunmedia.com and hit the podcast link. You could also subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're already with us, thank you. We just ask that you turn your friends and family on to us. Remember, we have a goal of 1,000 new subscribers every month, and we can't do it without your support. That's Gunshots Straight from the Hip, available right now at markgunmedia.com, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or the TuneIn Radio app. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Mark Gun Media. No hype, no hoopla, just damn good work.
For downloads of this and past episodes and information about all the multimedia services we offer, log on to our website at www.markgunmedia.com. That's markgunmedia.com. Welcome back to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. I'm Mark Gunn, and over the next few episodes, I'm telling you the story of Baraargua, the Awakening. This was an aphoristic tale that I wrote several years ago in honor of discovering part of my heritage through an ancestry DNA test and the fact that it's Black History Month. You'll notice that I'm using several different African languages in the titles of each chapter. Chapter 2, Kupanda Mbegu, Sowing the Seeds. My name is Dr. Malcolm Marcus Yezazi. Yes, my namesakes are those of two iconic civil rights figures, Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey. My parents knew something that I wouldn't come to know until later in life. A geneticist by trade and a social justice warrior by necessity. Long before the administration came into power, I was a fighter. Books, lectures, and most importantly, being on the ground with my people, fighting to end racism. Needless to say, success has been very limited. Over the years, I've been able to network with some of the most brilliant black minds on the planet. I'd always lamented the fact that as a people, we had a tendency to turn our noses up at black intelligentsia and always gravitated toward the slick-talking, poverty-pimping preacher. Part of our mistake was in a reliance on the past. We clung to the ways of Dr. King and the various wannabes that would assume to replace him as black moral leadership, and over time, they would be found out as frauds and summarily dismissed. We were looking for someone to lead us when we should have been relying on ourselves. You can only bang your head against a wall so many times. The frustration was unbearable. It was because of that and the ongoing injustice happening in America that I chose to come home to Africa. My interest in the plight of my people came at an early age. From the time that I could read, around 3 years old, my parents fed me a steady diet of black history and culture. They were both college professors teaching at historically black colleges and universities. They were also members of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. Ministers of Education and Defense, they were called. The mindset was that you must always be mentally and physically prepared to defend oneself. They immersed me in the teachings of Huey P. Newton, Bobby Seale, and Assata Shakur, among many others. Music with a message was a constant in my home. James Brown, Marvin Gaye, the Lost Poets. As I got older, hip-hop became a huge part of my musical diet. Public Enemy, KRS-One, X-Clan, and the criminally underrated Paris, a rapper out of the Bay Area. They spoke to me in a way that connected the dots of the education I'd been given by mom and dad. They also made sure that I read The Art of War by Sun Tzu. To them, it was extremely important that I knew the enemy, white America, as I knew myself. Throughout my childhood, my knowledge of self would get me into trouble with some of my teachers because I had a tendency to contradict the lies that they had tried to pass off as history. It was one incident in particular that caused my parents to pull me out of the school system for good. Back then, every February, it was customary to include their version of Black history into the curriculum. For years, we were taught that our history began with slavery and made a point of hiding all of the meaningful contributions blacks made to America. I asked one simple question, and that was it. Why are you lying? I proceeded to give my classmates a dissertation filled with the true history of our people. That didn't sit too well with the teacher, and I was hauled into the principal's office. My parents were called, and after reading the principal the Riot Act, withdrew me from that school. I was only in the second grade. My dad, in an act of clever, what I'll call smart-assitude, sued the school board and the National Education Association for what he called the miseducation of the American Negro. Carter G. Woodson was one of his favorite authors and would have been proud. There were no punitive damages sought. He did it because he knew he could, and he always got a kick out of scaring the establishment. From the second grade on, I was homeschooled by friends that ran in the same academic circles as my parents. I naturally gravitated toward history and the sciences. My classes were advanced for my age and would remain so until entering college. My college experience was intense, to say the very least. Graduating the equivalent of high school at 14 presented its own set of challenges. How is a kid, barely a teenager, going to fare in an environment with nothing but adults? Sounds like the makings of a sitcom, but I digress. Scholarship offers from schools all over the country came in. Yeah, I was an overachiever and had the grades to show it. My father decided that it was best for me to learn in the actual cradle of civilization, where the basis for all education was formed, in Africa. It was the first time I'd flown out of the country on my own for an extended amount of time. I'd spend the next 5 years studying at some of the best schools on the continent. Physics, biology, history, psychology, and computer science were among my majors. I traveled the length and breadth of the motherland seeking knowledge. Cape Peninsula University of Technology, the University of Nairobi, the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and finally the University of Pretoria, where I received my PhD. Once my studies were complete, I went back to the States, back to mom and dad. At 19, I immediately got a job as a consultant for several research firms, which, quite frankly, bored me after a while. The work simply wasn't challenging enough. Challenges that they were facing were no longer mysteries to me. My education was that good. While looking for my place in the world, America was looking to bring back the status quo. The election of Barack Obama, the first black president, scared enough whites into thinking that they were losing their way of life and vowed to take their country back. Donald John Trump was elected, and the rest, as they say, is history. This is when we decided it was time to get out of Dodge and back to the motherland. We settled in a location that shall not be named here out of fear of it being exploited. Nature, as it was intended, untouched by the hand of man. Yet, a mutually beneficial relationship was formed between it and the tribes who lived there. Imvelo, as she had come to be called by our ancestors, provided food, water, and shelter, and the tribes cared for her as if she were one of their own children. Imvelo held many secrets, including state-of-the-art research facilities and schools she kept hidden from the outside world. There had been stories passed down for many generations about the nature of that technology. Some believed it was otherworldly, while the tribal elders knew that it was developed from the knowledge passed down over centuries. It was here that my family and I thrived. We had utopia, but we also had brothers and sisters still struggling in America. I was in my 20s when I started doing research, focusing on the genetic differences between blacks here and in America. I wanted to know how environmental conditions and other factors affected our DNA on a generational level. What effect did over 400 years of slavery have on us, and what were the lasting consequences? My findings have been published in several scientific journals throughout the world, but banned in the States because they were seen as subversive and a threat to the New World Order established there. Just as in centuries past, America continues to have a real problem being called out on her original sin. It was then that a bit of self-discovery would change my life forever. I ran the same tests on myself and my parents using the exact same protocols, family origin being the first. I discovered that we were the direct descendants of Lucy, the very proof that all life began in Africa. Back in the 20th century, 1974 to be exact, a group of paleontologists were in Ethiopia when they discovered her remains. She was given the name Lucy because one of them, a Dr. Donald Johanson, had an old-fashioned music device, a cassette is what they called it, by a group named the Beatles. There was a song on it, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Someone suggested the name, and it stuck. I was able to get a lot of other basic information during my research, but there were some gaps that only my parents could fill. The most important discovery being that we were part of Lucy's original bloodline. One of the traditions we hold dear is that of storytelling. Our true history is handed down from generation to generation. Because of that, I learned a lot more than the scientists who discovered Lucy. For instance, her actual name was Ukafila, which loosely translates to life. Her exact birthplace remains unknown, but over the course of a few hundred years, she came to be known as Lewe, Haya, and Nolosha, to name a few. The further I dug, the more overwhelmed I became. Ancient language and writing systems, sciences, and tons of other history that remain hidden from those outside of the original family. It would take several years of study before I gained a full understanding of who I was and why I existed. I amassed a global network of scientists and researchers with the goal of ending the suffering of black people. That network extended to business leaders and politicians who were selected on the basis of DNA testing. Every member of what we called the Baraargua had a direct genetic connection to Ukafila. We developed cures for heart disease, sickle cell, hypertension, and a host of illnesses that were more problematic for black people. We spread our cures throughout the network and millions of lives were saved. However, we had no such connection in America, and they were the ones who needed it the most. In my mind, they needed something much more: freedom, and I set out on a mission to deliver it. In the here and now, the cancer that was the administration got worse. Blacks were no longer the exclusive victims of their hatred and vitriol. I found out that there were pockets of resistance, which was unusual since the First Amendment was the first thing to go. An assassination attempt was made on the life of Stephen Miller, but it failed. Because of that, anyone who wasn't white now fell under Jim Crow 2.0, and the cruelty displayed made Adolf Hitler look like a Boy Scout. White supremacist groups now made up the National Guard under the direction of Attorney General Sessions. The beatings and murders increased exponentially. Slaves were now being leased to Big Pharma for testing of new drugs. Since regulations had been removed, it didn't matter if they survived the trials or not. Over the next 2 years, the administration would try to realize its dreams of global dominance. This was made easier with Putin's Russia being a willing ally. Countries that left the European Union back in 2016 had no choice but to be annexed because, in the years following their moment of extreme xenophobia, their economies crumbled. European leaders were killed on live television. When Queen Elizabeth was beheaded, England fell in line like the rest. Meanwhile, I continued my work in formulating a plan to help my brothers and sisters in America. The Baraargua continued its global expansion by adding more family members. We sought military strategists, economists, and teachers. It was understood that if we were going to be liberators, we'd need to take a multi-level approach. There was one more piece of the puzzle, and it was soon to come. That was part one of my afro-futuristic story, The Baraargua, The Awakening. The story continues on the next episode. Don't miss it.
This is Mark Gunn Media.
Hit it!
One of the biggest accomplishments we've had over the past year is the continued growth of our podcast, Gunshots Straight from the Hip. If you haven't heard it, you can check it out now on our website at markgunmedia.com or on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or the TuneIn Radio app. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Past episodes are available for download right now. Each episode is written and produced from a perspective not heard enough in this medium, the Black perspective. However, Gunshot Straight from the Hip is not limited to a Black audience. Anyone can get something out of it. We tackle social and political issues, sometimes some slice of life stuff, in a way that's very compelling and unlike any other podcast on the market right now. With my experience as an award-winning audio producer and a reputation for being rather outspoken, Gunshots Straight from the Hip is something you won't want to miss. Over the next year, we want to add more subscribers, with a goal of 1,000 new subscribers every month. If you haven't joined us yet, go to our website at markgunmedia.com and hit the podcast link. You could also subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're already with us, thank you. We just ask that you turn your friends and family on to us. Remember, we have a goal of 1,000 new subscribers every month, and we can't do it without your support. That's Gunshots Straight from the Hip, available right now at markgunmedia.com, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or the TuneIn Radio app. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Mark Gunn Media. No hype, no hoopla, just damn good work.
If you're an advertiser, one of the most important things about getting your message out is actually standing out from the rest of the crowd. If you're listening to this program right now, this is where you'd hear your commercial. As an exclusive sponsor of Gunshots Straight from the Hip, your commercial is professionally produced and gets a longer shelf life based on your needs. Gunshots Straight from the Hip is a unique and compelling program unlike anything else in the marketplace. Episodes are available for download on iTunes, TuneIn, and markgunmedia.com. And depending on how you tailor your message, the potential for new and repeat customers is that much greater. Best of all, it's extremely cost-effective. If you'd like more information on how you can be a sponsor of this broadcast, call Mark Gunn Media, Inc. at 502-407-0283. That's 502-407-0283. Or log on to markgunmedia.com. You've been listening to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. The views expressed are those of the host and guests and not reflective of any business entity or anyone associated with this broadcast. If you have any comments or want more information on how to be a sponsor, log on to our website at markgunmedia.com or call us at 502-407-0283. That's 502-407-0283. Thank you for listening.
Mark Gunn Media. No hype, no hoopla, just damn good work.